been excited. I've really been excited about this morning, and having a chance to interview Sonja Bomhoff. Sonja Bomhoff, some of you know, some of you do not, many of you do not. That was Matt, her husband, and she's here with their daughters Mallory and Ashley, and they've been visiting with us for some time, off and on for years, for 5 years probably, almost 5 years. Since we were over in the other building. And Matt has been going to seminary at Bright Divinity School and is about, I think you've almost graduated, just finished the last semester, yay. And is actually taking a church, I can announce that? I just did. Is actually going to be taking a disciple church part-time over in River Oaks. And so well, look who's present. Their own regional minister is here. How nice. Yeah, nice to have y'all here. They'll let anybody in this place. Yeah, disciples, Baptists, everybody. Did she? So we're excited for Matt because he's going to be doing that, but that means we may not see them as much over the next months and so, but we will get to see them off and on. And the one thing I'd want to tell you about Sonja, and they have a very fascinating, interesting story that hopefully they'll get to share at some point down the line. But Sonja is a life coach and been a life coach for some time and is also a licensed, certified Brene Brown daring way trainer. Many of you know about Brene Brown and her work with vulnerability studies, and she has a number of certified programs, and Sonja is certified in a number of those, as well as trained in the Enneagram, for those of you who know the Enneagram. And just a wealth of information and a delight to talk with. And the few times we've been sitting down brainstorming that we were going to do this, I would have to say every time, immediately I just felt like I was being present with someone. I felt like someone was actually creating space for me to be present with myself, which is just such a gift. And we talked about what we might talk about this morning, and I even actually wrote down some questions for the interview, but we're just going to welcome her up here, and she said, well, you take it, and I'll go where you lead. And I'm like, that is a mistake. But let's welcome Sonja Bomhoff. So you can hold the mic, or you can just leave it there. You can do it, Matt, pick up the whole thing.
That was awesome, honey.
So one of the things that we've been talking about, Sonja, is I'm going to pull up my questions just to help, just in case.
I don't have any notes.
Yeah, I know. But one of the things that we talked about in our phone conversation last week that I thought was really interesting, this idea that Martin Luther King kind of initiated when he said that we are all caught up in this inextricable web of interconnectedness, right? And so that one thing that we do affects others, and what we do not do affects others. We're in, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, but we're caught up in this sort of interdependent interconnectedness. And so I've been talking about what it means to be human, as in the essence of which is to recognize that first, that interconnectedness, and then to act out of that, which is very challenging to our natural sort of biology, which is fear-based and ego-based, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I thought we would talk about then is how we form our stories. We only have about 10 or 15 minutes or so.
Oh, no.
So
that's it.
so we don't have a lot of time. We're going to take as much time of all this as we can. Okay. And so, but I wanted to get right into focusing on how our biology, how our neurobiology is caught up in our stories. And when I talked to you about that, I had said I'd been to this book festival, mm-hmm. and I saw this last week in Michigan, and these authors all said one thing that was in common that I just kind of never hit me until we were talking, and then you can explain why. But one of the authors all said at the one thing they had in common is that they never accepted their first drafts. They would never go with first drafts, period, no matter what someone else said about it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that kind of triggered this idea of part of my training with Dr. Brene Brown is she talks about something called the SFD. Anne Lamott actually coined that phrase. It actually means shitty first draft. We can call it sucky first draft today if you'd like. But it has to do with our brains are literally wired for story and for safety. So immediately, if we're in a conversation with someone and we get hooked, someone says something that kind of hits us wrong, right away our brain will start creating a story so that we feel safe. And the fascinating thing is that irregardless if the story is true or not, conspiracy or confabulation, the brain will reward us with a dopamine rush. And then all of a sudden, we feel better, and now we feel safe even though it's not correct. And then the challenge was that with that is now we see the world through that potentially not accurate story.
So are you saying then neurologically, essentially, our brain is going, we like the bad stories. We like the negative.
We just like a story that helps us feel safe.
We just like, okay, so it's regardless of if it's a positive or a negative story, it's familiar.
Familiar.
And we're going to go there.
Yeah. And then we move into this. I mean, how many of you have had a situation? Dr. Brene Brown actually talks about this. You walk out of a meeting with your boss, and your boss rolls her eyes and goes, and walks away. Right away, you make up a story, do you not? Or how about when you're texting someone, and maybe it's not the easiest conversation over text, which maybe that's not the best idea to begin with, but then all of a sudden you see those 3 dots after you sent the text, and then they go away. And they don't... You know what I'm talking about?
Wait, what does that mean? That happens to me a lot.
And maybe...
Does that mean something?
Well, that's the thing. You think it means something sometimes. And then we go into this place of, oh my gosh, I knew they didn't like me. I knew this. I knew that. I know they're mad at me. And actually, they're just at Whataburger in line ordering a burger. Right?
Yeah.
It's a good example.
Yeah. So you speak publicly, too.
Yes.
And so, like, on Sunday mornings, I'm speaking here. And so, and Sharma and I have talked about this as well. When we're talking and somebody's doing something, and I've already determined what that is, what they're doing now. And I've already said they're ignoring, they're scowling, they're upset about something I just said, or worse, somebody gets up and walks out.
Yeah.
And I've already determined, I'm trying to think in my mind, was it that sentence? Because that was just talking about my granddaughter. Or was it the previous one where I said there was no such thing as a physical resurrection? Which one was it? I can't tell now. What was, you know? And I mean, so that kind of thing, I'm already making up a narrative that they've already made a judgment and they're walking out. But the narrative in here is so much more supportive and inclusive, and yet I go there every time.
Yeah. Well, the brain left to itself is 5 times likely to go negative on its own.
Wow.
Yeah, so we that's why we have to be intentional, right, about our gratitude practices and things like that. And I think Father Richard Rohr talks about this, right, the whole Velcro and Teflon idea. It takes 1 nanosecond for something negative to stick to your brain, and 11 seconds for the joyful, beautiful things. So take 3 deep breaths anytime something wonderful happens, and just take it in and be present with it.
Wow. Yeah, that's a great idea. Just that practice of actually stopping when something grateful, when something nice happens, and actually focusing on it, just like what Darryl was doing. I mean, we think about these practices and what are they really for, but really that's what the Kairos moment is all about. It's learning to stop and to take breath, and then to allow whatever is negative to go, not without judgment, and then, in this case, to take whatever is positive and accept.
That's such a good point, too, because I talk to my clients often about practicing the pause. You know, to be a person who responds versus reacts, it takes practice, doesn't it? And to be someone who's cultivating curiosity in your life, we have certain patterns, ways that we have showed up, sometimes for years, and maybe it's not serving us well. But if we can't take time to create space and get curious, and that's why I liked what you said earlier about realizing just the integration, body, soul, and spirit, how it's all connected. And we have to learn, especially I think in this culture, that our emotions, we need to begin to pay attention to them because it's what goes first. It's like our tell. So if you get triggered by something, you pause and you get curious. Okay, I need to give myself permission to feel this for a moment. Breathe. Get curious. Because emotion's energy and it goes somewhere. So if you do not give yourself permission to metabolize that emotion, and sometimes that just is like acknowledging it, right? Being present with it, not judging it, like you were saying, and it's not good or bad, it just is, and let it like pass by like a cloud, right? It metabolizes. instead of stores. Literally, it can store in your body. And then why do you think over 90% of chronic illness is connected to emotional health? Isn't that something? But it's something in our culture we pretty much have pushed aside. At least that's how I was raised. If it's not going to produce something, if it's not measurable, my background is business and all that kind of stuff, so it was all about high achievement, getting it done, and we don't have time for emotions. Who can relate to that? Right? What's the point? Well, the point is you are carrying them around. So why do you think we have all this road rage today? Or have you ever gone to a restaurant and there's someone taking it out on the server? It's not even about the server. It's about not working through what you need to work through and getting curious. So get curious about your emotions and then realize the SFD, the sucky first draft. What can I say here?
I know, I was going to ask, I was wondering if you were going to say the word, and I wasn't going to say the word, and then I thought, you said the word. So
well, it's authentic. We got to be authentic people.
I'm good with that. I'm good. I think most of us are fine with that.
Yeah, and then realize, okay, what's the story in my head? And I just get curious about it. What's the story I just made up? She doesn't like me, he doesn't like me, I'm stupid, whatever it is. Did they say any of those things? No? So maybe we need to get curious about that and rumble with that. Helps us.
One of the things that I've said in a couple of sermons back when talking about emotions and the chemistry behind them, because most of these chemical reactions are default reactions, right, as you mentioned, and especially 5 times more likely to go to negative default than to positive. And so if we just even recognize that in terms of a curiosity, if we just recognize that in ourselves and in one another, if we just give ourselves, you talk about giving ourselves space. One of the sort of sacred attributes of faith, I think, is this idea of mercy, but showing ourselves mercy, showing ourselves this willingness to allow some space and go, you know what, that's probably one of those 5 times as likely defaults that there's absolutely nothing there, and I need to trust that. And that's hard to trust when it's a default.
Yeah, and so one of my permission slips I've given myself over the years that has cultivated self-compassion is literally permission to be human. Because like what you just described, that's part of the human condition. Okay, well, this is part of being human. So how can I be kind to myself in the process? Instead of what's wrong with me? Why do I think this way? Why am I going negative? Can't I get it together? Pull myself up by the bootstraps. Come on and get over it. So learning how to cultivate self-compassion in your life, I spend lots of time with my clients with that because it's a game changer. If we show up in compassion towards ourselves, guess what? We become more compassionate towards others. We can only give away what we have, right? So love your neighbor as yourself. So going back to being totally connected. So if I want to be aware and connected at a deeper, authentic level, if I can learn to love myself well in God, all of a sudden I see you differently. That's my personal experience because I was so hard on myself for years.
You know, the text that Matt read, and Sharm, oh, you're over there. Sharm, remind me who is our favorite, this author that we love, who's the Jewish professor, and thank you, Amy Jill Levine. I was watching one of her wonderful YouTubes. You can go online and find Amy Jill Levine's YouTubes about the Gospels. She takes the Gospels and she looks at Jesus' parables in particular, and she's looking at them from the eyes and ears of a Jew, because she's Jewish, but she teaches at Vanderbilt Seminary, or Vanderbilt School, in the religion department. And one of the things that she says about the parable of the pearl that Matt read is that it really is interesting that I think relates to this too, is this idea of how we take these first drafts and our lives are centered around these first drafts. We don't even realize how much they've taken control of the direction that we take in our life and then reinforce those in so many ways. But one of the things she said about that parable is she said that after she'd taught that class, here you have this merchant, and merchants were kind of ruthless, actually. They're not like the nice person down at the jewelry store, in the corner. These people they're slave traders. They are dealing in some pretty shady things as well. I mean, they make a living out of selling stuff to people. And so he's looking for a valuable pearl. He's not a positive character in the story necessarily, but he gives up everything, sells everything to have this one thing. So what Amy Jill Levine says, so what's he got? What's he got then? He's got a pearl. He doesn't have anything else. He's got a pearl. He can't eat it. He can't sleep on it. He can't, clothe himself with it. It's a pearl. He's got to either get rid of it, but it's too valuable to get rid of. And what's he talking about? He's basically talking about an addiction. He's basically talking about that thing, that which we end up sometimes giving up our lives for. And in this sense, this kingdom is not this happy, look, I got the best thing ever. The kingdom is, have you taken a good hard look at yourself? Have you taken a good hard look at the stories that you're telling yourself? And it's like, and that's why I played the segment from Mandy Patinkin on that interview, that he says at the end of this movie, and years later, he said it occurs to him, that's the real question to ask. You've been in this business of revenge. I've been in it for so long, and my whole life has been that default story. Now what?
Yeah, it's what is writing your story. So if I don't learn to get curious, are my emotions writing my story? Am I letting someone else's behavior write my story? Because of the way they show up towards me, and then I just create this story based on their behavior, and then now, who's writing the end of the story? So, and that leads me also to the idea of it's so important to pause and get curious and go, okay, what is it? What am I telling myself based on this experience? Is it even true? And then what are my values? That's a whole nother topic, right? So that I can show up in my integrity. So I have a quick example. My brother passed away at 35 years old of glioblastoma brain tumor. It was a very difficult season for me and for him, obviously. Our whole family, he's 10 years younger than me. But after he passed away, his widow, obviously, who was very young, was going through a difficult time as well. And it was a very painful season. And there were hurtful things happening. So am I going to let how she's processing things become my story? And that's when I learned, okay, wait a minute, one of my values is kindness. So I will choose to be kind and show up in my kindness because it's who I am, versus I'm just being kind because that's what I'm supposed to do. It's the right thing. You feel the difference in that? It's who I am. I'm owning my story. So I show up now in that because I actually rumbled with that story for months to get to the other side of the place of I will write the end of my story in God, not someone else's behavior and not my loss and my grief. But it's not either or. And so what I mean by that, it's both and. I give myself permission to feel what I need to feel and get real about it and move through it so I can get to the other side and own the story of grace and love and acceptance or whatever it is that I'm being brought to. And then I'm more connected at the end of the day.
Is that what this rumbling is?
Yes.
That's part of that whole rumbling process, is
Yeah.
that being vulnerable enough to,
It's a big
to
deal.
give it space,
Yeah.
to be present to it, to be curious about it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, and vulnerability, as Dr. Brene Brown says, it doesn't feel good. But it's part of being human, it's part of the deal. So she actually says, embrace the suck. So in other words, it's a part of it. I need to know that this doesn't feel good when I'm rumbling, but it's part of the journey. Because if I am not vulnerable, right, I will not connect authentically with other people. That's when all these things get in the way.
Yeah.
Story changes. So, yeah.
Yeah, wow.
A lot to it.
There is so much. This has been so much fun. I mean, I don't know. There's been a lot just in this small conversation, but we need to have you back. We need to have you back and
Thank
to
you for
ask you some
having
more
me.
questions.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.